The sun climbed over the jagged hills surrounding Fort Raven, washing the base in a metallic glow. The compound was alive with the sounds of barking orders, clanking boots, and the rhythmic thunder of cadets running laps around the training field. It was inspection week, when every mistake, every loose thread, every slouch could earn a soldier weeks of punishment. Among the incoming recruits stepping off the transport bus was a woman who didn't seem to belong. Her uniform was regulation, but plain, her cap pulled low, her posture calm rather than rigid. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. Her name, on the paper she handed to the gate officer, read Catherine Hayes, and her rank box was left blank. The officer barely looked up. "New intake, Building C," he muttered, stamping her file and waving her through. Catherine nodded and stepped onto the gravel path that led toward the barracks. Every detail she saw registered in her sharp mind, the faded motivational posters, the nervous recruits whispering to one another, the faint smell of sweat and polish that always hung over military housing. She had been through dozens of bases in her career, but this one was different. It was her base now. What no one knew, not the gate guard, not the recruits, not even the officers, was that Catherine Hayes was the Navy's youngest active admiral, sent here undercover by the Pentagon itself. The rumors of abuse at Fort Raven had reached the top brass. Recruits were breaking under pressure, instructors crossing lines in the name of discipline. Catherine had volunteered to see the truth firsthand. She could have arrived with fanfare, with salutes and ceremony, but she had chosen anonymity. The best way to test leadership, she believed, was to see how it behaved when no one was watching. As she approached the main yard, the ground shook with the thunder of cadets running drills. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut and a scar above his eyebrow stalked down the line, shouting at a trembling young soldier. "Back straight. Chin up. You think the enemy's gonna wait for you to tie your damn bootlace?" The man was Sergeant Logan Reed, one of Fort Raven's most decorated instructors, and one of the reasons the base had drawn scrutiny. His reputation was a mix of legend and fear. Recruits said he could spot weakness from a mile away and break it down with words sharper than bullets. Catherine paused, studying him. His authority was undeniable. Every recruit stiffened when he looked their way. But beneath his booming voice, she sensed exhaustion, a man who believed he was holding chaos together through sheer force. She had met hundreds like him, good soldiers who had let control replace compassion. When Logan's eyes swept across the yard and landed on her, he frowned. She didn't look nervous enough, didn't move like a new recruit fumbling for approval. He strode toward her, boots thudding like drumbeats. "You," he barked, stopping inches from her face. "Name?" "Hayes, sir," she said evenly. "Sir? Do I look like a sir to you, recruit?" She didn't blink. "No, Sergeant." His jaw tightened. "You knew?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Then wipe that calm look off your face. You're not on vacation. Around here, calm means careless." Catherine tilted her head slightly, as if considering the advice. "Understood." He glared at her for a long second, waiting for the usual signs of fear-darting eyes, trembling lips, but saw none. It irritated him more than open defiance. "Fall in with the others," he snapped. "You'll learn soon enough that around here, attitude gets you nowhere." "Yes, Sergeant." She moved to the end of the line. Recruits glanced at her curiously. Some whispered, "Bad luck getting noticed by Reed on day one." She gave them a small, reassuring smile. The morning drills began, each exercise executed with mechanical precision. Push-ups, crawls, sprints. Logan barked commands until voices cracked and sweat soaked through shirts. Catherine followed every order flawlessly, keeping pace without strain. It wasn't pride driving her. It was observation. She was watching how he led, how he punished, how he inspired or failed to. By noon, the air was thick with heat and tension. Logan's whistle cut through it like a blade. Break for chow. 10 minutes. Recruits stumbled toward the mess hall, collapsing on benches. Catherine lingered near the doorway, jotting mental notes. She saw one recruit too scared to eat, another clutching a bruised shoulder. None of the supervisors noticed or cared. As she picked up a tray, a familiar voice growled behind her. "You move like you're better than the rest." She turned to find Logan standing there, arms crossed. "Just moving how I was taught, Sergeant." He narrowed his eyes. "Where'd you train before this?" "Different divisions. Here and there." "Smart answer," he said, but his tone held suspicion. "Watch yourself, Hayes. Confidence looks a lot like arrogance around here. I'll remember that." He studied her another second, trying to read her. For the briefest moment, she almost felt sorry for him. He was a man used to control, and she was about to upend his world. That night, as the recruits slept, Catherine sat on her bunk with a notebook hidden inside a training manual. She wrote in neat, precise lines. Observation Day 1. Discipline excessive. Morale dangerously low. Leadership by intimidation. Primary subject, SGT. Logan Reed efficient, but emotionally corrosive. Potential for reform unknown. She closed the notebook and looked out the window. The base lights glowed across the field, harsh and unwavering, like watchful eyes. Somewhere beyond them, the sea shimmered faintly under moonlight, a reminder of why she'd joined the Navy in the first place. Not for power, but for purpose. The door creaked open. One of the younger recruits, Private Miller, peeked in nervously. Hayes? You awake?" "Barely," she said with a half-smile. He stepped closer, whispering, "You shouldn't talk back to Sergeant Reed. He's not patient, I noticed. He got a guy reassigned last month for asking too many questions. Just be careful." Catherine nodded. "Thanks, Miller." He left, and she lay back on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Fear. Everywhere there's fear. That, she thought, was the real enemy here. Not laziness, not mistakes, but fear masquerading as respect. When morning came, the bugle sounded before dawn. Recruits stumbled outside for formation, breath fogging in the cold air. Catherine lined up silently at the back, ready to continue the charade. Logan paced before them, shouting the day's orders. As the sun rose over Fort Raven, no one knew the woman standing among the recruits held the authority to change everything. To them, she was just another face in a crowd of nervous rookies. To Catherine Hayes, this was the beginning of a mission that would test not just the soldiers, but the soul of the entire base. And in a few short days, one impulsive act from the man now barking at her would ignite a storm that neither of them could control. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when the recruits lined up in the gravel training yard. Their breath-formed clouds in the crisp air, muscles tensed and eyes fixed on Sergeant Logan Reed. He paced like a predator, scanning for weakness, shouting orders in short, explosive bursts. The metallic clink of belt buckles and boots echoed across the empty spaces between them. Catherine Hayes stood silently in the back, absorbing every detail. Every twitch of the recruit's shoulders, every hesitant glance, every moment of tension told a story. She noticed how Logan singled out the smallest flaws, a crooked stance, a hesitant step, and punished them without hesitation. Discipline was strict, but respect seemed almost non-existent. Today's task: barracks cleanup and inventory inspection. Recruits carried mops, scrub brushes, and buckets, moving in tense, synchronized motions under Logan's watchful eye. He barked instructions constantly, criticizing even the smallest errors. "Move faster. That's a sloppy mop stroke. Eyes up, Hayes." No dawdling. Catherine moved deliberately. She swept and scrubbed with precision, keeping pace with the other recruits, trying to remain invisible, to blend in. She knew any misstep would attract attention. Still, human error was inevitable. A small shake of her hand, a misjudged step, and a bucket tipped slightly, spilling a thin layer of cleaning foam across the floor. Logan spotted it instantly. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "Hayes, what did I say about attention to detail?" He barked, striding toward her with heavy, measured steps. The other recruits froze mid-scrub, watching the tension rise like a storm cloud over the training yard. I'm sorry, Sergeant. I didn't mean," Catherine began, but he cut her off. "Don't mean me. This is about action. You think the enemy's going to wait while you wipe up Bubbles?" His voice thundered, bouncing off the walls of the barracks. Before she could respond further, Logan grabbed the disciplinary spray bottle, a plastic container filled with harmless but humiliating foam used to mark lazy or careless recruits. The ritual was brutal. Being sprayed wasn't painful, but it was a public mark of failure, a reminder to all that the soldier had slipped. "You need a reminder, recruit," Logan growled. He raised the bottle and sprayed her directly across the chest, the foam covering her uniform in a cold, clinging layer. The other recruits flinched and whispered among themselves, some stifling laughter, others horrified. Catherine froze, but only for a heartbeat. Then she straightened, letting the foam drip harmlessly onto the floor. She raised her chin, meeting his furious eyes. "Yes, Sergeant," she said evenly, her voice calm and controlled, betraying not the slightest hint of fear or embarrassment. Logan blinked, momentarily stunned. Most recruits crumpled at this point, apologizing profusely, head down, stammering. But this woman stood perfectly still, dripping foam, eyes locked on his. His pride, already colossal, wavered. "Are you joking me?" he said through gritted teeth. "Do you even realize what just happened?" "I do, Sergeant." "Noted," she replied, her voice steady. There was no sarcasm, no challenge, only an almost imperceptible hint of amusement, a quiet authority that unnerved him further. The yard went silent. A few recruits exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to laugh or fear retaliation. Catherine didn't flinch. She simply wiped a bead of foam from her cheek with her sleeve and returned to her mop, slow, deliberate, and unbothered. Logan's jaw tightened. This wasn't supposed to happen. The disciplinary spray was meant to break spirits, to humble careless soldiers. And yet, the usual effect had failed completely. He had never seen a recruit take it with such composure, calm, collected, almost daring him to do more. "Move it, all of you," he barked, redirecting his anger toward the rest of the line, trying to regain control. But inside, a flicker of doubt had appeared. Who was this recruit? Why was she unfazed? Catherine returned to her duties silently, observing, cataloging, and thinking. She didn't react because she wanted to teach Logan a lesson, not humiliation, but perspective. She wanted to see how a man used to commanding fear would handle someone who refused to be intimidated. The incident spread quickly. In the mess hall later that morning, whispers floated through the ranks. "Did you see Hayes?" one recruit whispered. She didn't even flinch. She must be new. But who stays that calm under Reed? Another replied, "Careful." A third muttered, "Reed doesn't like to be laughed at." Meanwhile, Logan's mind raced. He could not place her. She didn't fit any profile in the roster. She had no paperwork. No one knew she had arrived. Yet she had endured his punishment with complete composure and an almost unnatural command of herself. That unnerved him more than the defiance of any recruit he had ever trained. By evening, Catherine was alone in the barracks, sitting on the edge of her bunk with a towel draped over her shoulders. She carefully noted the day's events in a small notebook she carried, hidden beneath her uniform. Disciplinary incident observed. Primary subject, SGT, Logan Reed, demonstrated rigid authority, reliance on intimidation. Subject Hayes displayed emotional stability under direct provocation. Potential for observation, high. Behavioral responses indicate possible reform opportunities in leadership methods. Outside, the sound of recruits laughing and shouting in the yard reached her ears, mingling with the faint hum of generators. She knew that Logan's pride would not allow him to forget today. The incident, though minor, had created a ripple that would spread through Fort Raven, unseen by most, but deeply felt by those paying attention. Catherine lay back on her bunk, exhausted but alert. For 20 years, she had trained others, commanded fleets, and managed crises on the highest levels of the Navy. And yet, here, in the quiet darkness of the barracks, she felt the familiar thrill of a new challenge, the chance to see leadership in its rawest, most unfiltered form. In the distance, the moonlight reflected off the base's towering fences. A lone watchman patrolled silently, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing inside the hearts of both a decorated admiral and a decorated sergeant. Both were about to learn lessons neither had expected, lessons that would shake Fort Raven to its core. And in the coming days, one small act, the spray of foam, would become the catalyst for a series of events that would challenge authority, test morality, and redefine what it meant to lead in the United States Navy. Catherine closed her notebook. Tomorrow, the real observation would begin. And Logan Reed, proud, unyielding, and utterly unaware, would be right at the center of it. The battlefield of discipline and respect had been set, and the first move had just been made. The day after the spray incident, Fort Raven was buzzing in a way that felt almost electric. Recruits moved with tentative energy, their conversations laced with curiosity, awe, and fear. The rumor of the mysterious recruit who had faced Sergeant Logan Reed without flinching spread like wildfire, weaving its way through the barracks, the mess hall, and the drill yards. "Did you see her yesterday?" whispered Private Jensen to his bunkmate. "She didn't even blink when Reed sprayed her." "Yeah," his friend murmured. "I've been at Fort Raven for 6 months. Nobody walks into his line like that. Nobody. Even the newer recruits, those. Just barely holding their balance under Logan's authority, couldn't help but watch her with a mixture of admiration and confusion. There was something magnetic about her calm demeanor, the way she moved deliberately, with no hesitation. She didn't ask for attention, yet it found her everywhere she went. Meanwhile, Sergeant Reed was growing increasingly unsettled. His usual confidence faltered in subtle ways. He barked at the recruits with the same volume and force, yet his words seemed to lack their usual bite. When he glanced toward Catherine, standing silently at the back of the line during drills, he noticed her calm composure, her posture perfectly straight, hands steady, eyes unwavering. For the first time in years, he felt unsure, off balance. "Recruits, pick up the pace," he shouted, but his voice carried a hint of uncertainty. Catherine followed every command precisely, yet she executed them with an efficiency and clarity that highlighted the small flaws in his leadership. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to the casual observer, but Logan sensed it immediately. After drills during chow, the whispers escalated. Groups of recruits huddled together in the mess hall, stealing glances at Catherine as she quietly took her seat at the far end of the table. Some had already begun speculating about her past. "Do you think she trained somewhere else?" one asked. "No," another replied. "This isn't just training. She knows everything. How we move, what we should do, even how Reed thinks." "What if she's an officer? Some kind of evaluator?" The idea sent a chill down the spines of many recruits. None of them dared ask directly, but their eyes constantly flicked toward Catherine, searching for a clue to her identity. At the same time, Captain Ramirez, the base's second-in-command, had begun to notice discrepancies. He had walked past the barracks that morning, clipboard in hand, and observed Catherine calmly instructing a group of recruits on proper formation. He raised an eyebrow. This was unusual. Normally, recruits didn't correct each other, let alone correct instructions from a senior sergeant. "Who is that?" Ramirez asked quietly of a passing corporal. "No idea, sir," the corporal replied. "She just appeared yesterday. Nobody has paperwork on her." Ramirez frowned, his instincts telling him something was off. He picked up the phone to contact headquarters. The voice on the other end responded with a single line, leaving him puzzled. "Do not interfere. Observation in progress." That cryptic message only intensified the mystery. Meanwhile, Logan's frustration grew. He prided himself on reading people, on breaking them down, on understanding their weaknesses. And yet, Catherine remained an enigma. No hesitation, no fear, no sign of weakness. He tried to assert control the next day during a tactical exercise, ordering recruits to simulate a defensive perimeter. Catherine executed every maneuver flawlessly. More than that, she subtly improved on his instructions, adjusting formation spacing, alerting recruits to potential hazards, and even correcting small errors he hadn't noticed. The recruits noticed, and their respect for her grew. Some openly followed her advice during exercises, ignoring Logan's sharp warnings. His voice, which once carried unquestioned authority, now competed with hers. By the evening, the whispers had reached an unspoken crescendo. Recruits gathered in corners of the barracks, sharing observations, theories, and quiet speculation. One of them, Private Miller, finally approached Catherine hesitantly. Recruit Hayes?" he began, voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone's talking, we think. Maybe you're more than just a recruit." Catherine smiled faintly, just enough to reassure him without confirming anything. "I'm here to learn, just like you," she said. Her tone was calm, but carried authority, enough to leave Miller both comforted and more curious than ever. Meanwhile, Logan was spiraling. That evening, he paced the empty drill yard, replaying the events in his mind. He had seen many recruits break, many crumble under pressure, yet Catherine remained unmoved. He remembered the spray, the calm in her eyes, the almost imperceptible hint of amusement. It was infuriating. "How?" he muttered aloud. "Nobody. No one stands up to me like that. Who? What are you?" He had no answers, only a growing sense of unease. The recruits whispered in his ear. The command chain seemed less rigid, and even his usual tactics felt inadequate. Logan had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable in a decade of service. The next morning, the tension thickened. Catherine continued her quiet observations, noting not just his tactics, but his interactions with recruits. The subtle gestures that revealed his pride, his insecurities, and his strict adherence to tradition over empathy. She wasn't there to embarrass him, not yet, but she was learning every detail, cataloging it for the days ahead. By midweek, the base felt different. Even the weather seemed to echo the change. Gusts of wind whipped across the training field, rattling metal doors and sending loose papers fluttering like nervous soldiers. Recruits moved with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Every glance toward Catherine carried the unspoken question, "Who is she?" Captain Ramirez noticed it too. During an afternoon briefing, he leaned toward the communications officer. "Keep an eye on her," he said quietly. "We've got no records, but she's unusual, too precise, too calm. Something's not right." The officer nodded. "Yes, sir." Meanwhile, Logan tried to regain control. He pushed recruits harder during combat simulations, barked louder, and reminded everyone that failure was unacceptable. But every attempt to assert dominance was undermined subtly by Catherine's silent efficiency. She executed commands faster, more accurately, and with a calmness that exposed cracks in his authority. The recruits noticed. They began asking her questions during downtime, seeking guidance over his. They confided their doubts, their fears, their small mistakes, and she responded with patience, insight, and quiet wisdom. Logan watched all of this unfold, frustration building like a fire he couldn't control. Late that night, after the recruits were tucked into their bunks, Logan stormed into the empty barracks where Catherine was quietly cleaning her uniform. "Recruit Hayes," he barked, hands on his hips. "Report." Catherine looked up, her expression serene. "Yes, Sergeant? Don't think I don't see what's happening. You're undermining my authority," he said, voice rising. "You're here 2 days, and already you're turning my recruits against me." Catherine raised an eyebrow, calm as ever. "I am not here to undermine anyone, Sergeant. I am observing, and I am learning. Your methods are effective in some ways, but they also create fear. Fear is not respect." Logan froze, the words hitting harder than any reprimand could. Nobody, not a recruit, not a fellow officer, had ever challenged him like this. "Fear is discipline," he growled, struggling to regain composure. "It builds strength." "Discipline without respect is hollow," she replied softly. "Strength isn't measured by how much they obey you, Sergeant. It's measured by how much they follow willingly, even when they're afraid of nothing." Logan stared at her, the tension between them crackling like electricity. In that moment, something shifted. He realized this wasn't just a recruit. This was someone who understood the very principles he had been trying to enforce, but in ways he could barely comprehend. The whispers in the barracks, the curious stares from recruits, the subtle but undeniable respect she was earning, all of it was leading to a confrontation neither of them had yet realized. Logan would be tested in ways he hadn't imagined, and Catherine's mission to observe, challenge, and perhaps reform him, and the base was just beginning. Outside, the wind howled across Fort Raven, rattling the metal gates, as if echoing the storm of change quietly brewing within its walls. The first crack in Sergeant Logan Reed's unshakable authority had appeared, and with it, the promise of a reckoning that would shake the base to its core. Tomorrow, Catherine Hayes would continue her observation. But Logan had already made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated her. And Fort Raven would never be the same again. The dawn at Fort Raven arrived gray and heavy, the fog creeping across the training yard like a silent witness to the tension simmering among its ranks. Recruits lined up for morning drills, their breaths misting in the cold air. Sergeant Logan Reed strode at the front, a figure of intimidation, his boots thudding against the gravel as he barked orders, each one sharper than the last. The recruits, still buzzing from yesterday's whispers about the mysterious recruit, moved with mechanical precision, trying desperately not to attract his ire. Catherine Hayes, standing quietly in the rear, observed it all with surgical attention. Her calm presence seemed almost out of place amid the chaos. She didn't just watch the movements of the soldiers. She watched Logan, the subtle shifts in his posture, the flinch in his tone when someone hesitated, the way his eyes darted when he suspected a recruit of insubordination. Every detail was noted, catalogued, and mentally analyzed. Today, she decided, she would test the base's system more directly. Not with defiance, but with subtle action, observing both the recruits' responses and Logan's leadership. She knew fear had its place in military discipline, but when overused, it eroded morale, creativity, and resilience. She needed to see how far the imbalance had gone. The first drill involved a tactical obstacle course. Recruits sprinted through mud pits, crawled under nets, and scaled walls with ropes. the air filled with the rhythmic pounding of feet and Logan's ever-present commands. Catherine moved with precision, not a stumble or misstep, but more importantly, she began offering quiet advice to those around her. "Shift your weight slightly to the left, easier balance," she murmured to a recruit struggling on the rope. "Maintain a straight line to conserve energy," she whispered to another attempting a wall climb. The recruits absorbed her advice, and for the first time, some of them smiled, a small but unmistakable spark of relief amid the grueling exercises. Logan noticed this immediately. His voice, which had been a constant, controlling force, seemed suddenly less absolute. "What's going on over there?" he barked, turning sharply toward Catherine. "Recruit Hayes, is that an order you're giving?" Catherine turned to him slowly, expression calm. "Not giving orders, Sergeant. Just offering guidance to those who asked." Logan's eyes narrowed. "Guidance?" he snapped. "You are here to obey, not to teach." "Yes, Sergeant," she replied evenly, never breaking her composure. The recruits, sensing Logan's irritation, glanced nervously between the two figures. Catherine's calm defiance contrasted sharply with Logan's explosive authority. He had been the unchallenged center of Fort Raven for years, yet here was someone moving within his sphere, affecting his soldiers without lifting a hand against him. After the obstacle course, they regrouped for a tactical briefing. Logan outlined a defensive simulation. The recruits would have to protect a mock perimeter while under timed attack conditions. Every movement, every order was scrutinized. Catherine followed silently, observing. But when a recruit misinterpreted one of Logan's commands, she gently corrected the positioning. "Shift your squad slightly forward," she instructed, "to cover the blind spot near the north post." The adjustment was small but effective. Within seconds, the recruits responded, executing flawlessly. Logan's face contorted with a mixture of confusion and frustration. He had trained these soldiers for months, yet a single suggestion from a recruit, or more accurately, someone he believed to be a recruit, had produced better results. "Hayes," he barked, marching toward her. "Why are you interfering?" Catherine met his gaze, unwavering. "I am not interfering, Sergeant. I am observing, and ensuring the exercise reflects proper tactical discipline." His face flushed. The audacity. Nobody, not a recruit, not even a fellow officer, spoke to him like this. His authority felt challenged, yet she was careful to avoid outright defiance. Every word, every action was calculated, deliberate a test, not a confrontation. The exercise continued, but Logan found himself second-guessing each instruction. Recruits, emboldened by Catherine's guidance, executed maneuvers with greater precision, showing initiative he had never encouraged. He realized that fear alone was insufficient. Respect, engagement, and trust were missing elements he had long neglected. Later, during a rest period, Catherine quietly pulled aside a few recruits. "Observe, but don't fear," she instructed. "Logan is strict, yes, but discipline comes from understanding as much as obedience. Learn the rules, but also learn to think." The recruits hung on her every word. Even those who had cowered under Logan's temper began to relax, breathing a little easier, their confidence growing. Whispers circulated. "She knows what she's doing. She's not just a recruit." Meanwhile, Logan's irritation boiled beneath the surface. Back in his office, he replayed the day's events in his mind. Every drill, every correction Catherine had made, every subtle act of guidance she had given, it gnawed at him. He prided himself on perfection, on control, yet she had altered the course of the day without confrontation. "What is she?" he muttered aloud. "Why isn't she afraid? Why aren't they afraid?" Logan realized something dangerous. Fear alone could not maintain control when someone possessed true competence and calm authority. Catherine's quiet interventions, had illuminated the cracks in his leadership. And worse, she was teaching his recruits without violating protocol. The tipping point came during the evening formation. Logan, frustrated and exhausted, attempted to reassert control. He barked instructions with double the intensity, but Catherine anticipated his moves and adjusted the recruits' responses subtly, without overt defiance. The soldiers responded with precision and efficiency, leaving Logan stunned. His usual dominance was slipping from his grasp, not because he lacked skill, but because Catherine had introduced a new dynamic one he couldn't crush with authority alone. Finally, after the formation, Logan cornered her in the yard, pacing in agitation. "Recruit Hayes," he said, voice tight, "you are pushing boundaries." "Who gave you the right to?" "I am here to observe, Sergeant," Catherine interrupted smoothly, "and to ensure that discipline serves its purpose. Fear alone does not produce soldiers. It produces resentment and mistakes. You pride yourself on obedience, but what you are creating is fragile." Logan froze, the weight of her words sinking in. Nobody had ever spoken to him like this. Nobody had challenged his methods so directly and with such authority, yet without anger or disrespect. His mind raced. Who is this woman? As she turned to leave, the recruits watched silently, their respect for her deepening. Logan realized that the real test had only just begun, not for Catherine, but for him. He had been confronted with a leadership mirror, and it reflected flaws he had never admitted to himself. The night fell over Fort Raven, heavy and quiet. Inside the barracks, recruits whispered in hushed tones about Catherine Hayes. Some speculated she was a covert evaluator. Others thought she might be a visiting officer in disguise. Nobody could confirm anything, but the aura around her was undeniable. Logan sat alone in his office, staring at the training reports, replaying the events over and over. The spray incident was no longer just an anomaly, it was a turning point. Catherine had survived his most humiliating punishment without flinching, and had begun influencing his recruits in subtle, undeniable ways. Tomorrow would be another day of observation, and Logan knew it. A storm was gathering, one that would test not just the recruits, but his own understanding of leadership, authority, and control. And Catherine Hayes, quietly confident, was at the eye of it. The morning sun burned a pale orange across Fort Raven, casting long shadows over the drill yard. The recruits stood in formation, exhaustion and tension etched into every young face. Sergeant Logan Reed paced in front, his usual authority amplified by frustration, his voice sharp with the precision of a man used to absolute control. Yet even he felt the uncertainty that had been creeping through his mind ever since Catherine Hayes arrived. Catherine had spent the past 2 weeks quietly observing. She had endured his punishments, corrected his instructions, and subtly guided the recruits. Every interaction she had orchestrated had been a test of the system, a test of the recruits, and most importantly, a test of Logan himself. Today, the experiment would reach its climax. Rumors had circulated among the recruits for days. Whispers in the barracks suggested that Catherine wasn't a recruit at all. Some claimed she was a visiting officer, others that she was a Pentagon evaluator. Logan, meanwhile, refused to acknowledge these rumors aloud, but he felt their weight every time her calm eyes met his. He had no idea what was coming. At precisely 0900 hours, the base alarm sounded, signaling a surprise inspection. Officers and recruits alike froze. Everyone knew that inspections were rare and usually meant humiliation, paperwork, or both. Logan's pulse quickened. He had faced inspections before, but never with the uncertainty of not knowing who would be evaluating him. The gates of the yard opened, and a convoy of black SUVs rolled in, their engines rumbling like a distant thunderstorm. A hush fell over the recruits. Catherine stepped forward from the back of the line, her posture immaculate, every movement measured and calm. The recruits instinctively straightened, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. From the lead SUV, a figure emerged, tall, commanding, and impossibly precise in their movements. The uniform was unlike any Catherine had worn in the past 2 weeks of disguise. Golden stripes adorned her sleeves, medals glimmered in the sun, and a polished insignia marked the rank of Admiral of the United States Navy. Every head in the yard turned to watch. The air seemed to vibrate with anticipation. "Good morning, soldiers," the figure announced, voice strong, clear, and unmistakably authoritative. "I am Admiral Catherine Hayes, United States Navy, and I have been observing this base for the past 2 weeks." A collective gasp echoed across the yard. Recruits froze, eyes wide, jaws slack. Logan's face went pale. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He could feel the color draining from his face, his mind struggling to reconcile what he saw. The recruits' whispers grew louder. "It's her. It's really her. Admiral Hayes? The Admiral Hayes?" Logan swallowed hard. He had disciplined her, humiliated her, and tried to assert dominance over her without knowing he was dealing with the most powerful officer on the base. And now she stood before him, unyielding, her presence radiating a calm authority he had never challenged and had never before been challenged by. Catherine's eyes swept over the platoon, landing finally on Logan. He stood at rigid attention, incapable of speech, his chest tight with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and something else he hadn't felt in years: vulnerability. "I have observed your methods, Sergeant Reed," she said, her tone steady, precise. "I have noted your strengths: discipline, attention to detail, tactical knowledge. But I have also noted your weaknesses: over-reliance on fear, neglect of morale, and the erosion of respect among your soldiers. Leadership is not built on intimidation alone. It is built on trust, guidance, and understanding." Logan's fists clenched at his sides. This was not a reprimand. It was a reckoning. He wanted to speak, to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't. He had never been silenced by anyone, not superiors, not peers, not recruits, and now, standing before the woman he had unknowingly humiliated, he had nothing to say. Admiral Hayes turned her gaze to the recruits. "I have been among you as a recruit, unseen, unrecognized. I watched your struggles, your mistakes, your moments of courage and hesitation. Some of you have shown initiative, empathy, and resilience. Others have faltered under pressure. Both are expected in training. Both are teachable moments." A few recruits shifted nervously. They had shared their doubts, their mistakes, and now the person they had trusted as a mentor was revealed to be the highest authority on the base. The revelation was overwhelming, but inspiring. The respect they felt for her grew tenfold. "Sergeant Reed," Catherine continued, her voice turning slightly colder, but never harsh, "you have created an environment where fear dominates. You punish mistakes rather than correct them. You rely on intimidation rather than guidance. I have watched as your recruits flinched, as they whispered among themselves, as they hesitated not out of caution, but out of terror. This is not leadership. This is control." Logan's head bowed slightly, a rare gesture of humility. He had always believed discipline and fear were interchangeable, but he could feel the truth of her words, cutting deeper than any reprimand he had ever delivered. Admiral Hayes paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The recruits watched in silence, understanding that this was more than a critique. It was a lesson in what leadership truly meant. "However," she continued, her tone softening, "I do not believe in destroying potential. Sergeant Reed has skill, knowledge, and experience that can be invaluable if directed with understanding rather than intimidation. Today, he will begin his reformation, alongside those he commands, under my supervision. The yard erupted in stunned murmurs. Logan's mind raced. Reformation? Under her supervision? The woman he had humiliated, the one who had stood before him calmly while he sprayed her with foam, was now the architect of his own rehabilitation. He wanted to argue, to resist, to assert dominance, but the truth was undeniable. She had outmaneuvered him without aggression, without insult, without even raising her voice. Catherine's gaze softened, and for the first time, Logan noticed a hint of approval, a recognition that beneath his pride, there was potential. "You will learn to lead, not merely to control," she said, turning her attention back to the recruits. "And you will understand that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned." The recruits absorbed every word. Their admiration for her grew, their respect for Sergeant Reed shifted, tinged now with the awareness that even he had much to learn. Logan swallowed hard. For the first time in his career, he felt the full weight of accountability, not just for himself, but for every recruit who had looked to him for guidance. He realized that the spray incident, the moment that had seemed trivial and humiliating, had been the first spark of a transformation he could no longer ignore. Admiral Hayes concluded the assembly with a calm, yet firm command. Fort Raven will no longer be a place where fear governs. It will be a place where discipline, respect, and leadership coexist. We will rebuild together, starting today. The recruits erupted in applause, though none were as loud as Logan's heartbeat in his chest. He had been confronted with the impossible, a mentor, a guide, and a superior who had never needed to intimidate to command respect. The sun rose higher, illuminating the faces of every recruit and officer in the yard. Catherine Hayes, standing tall in her Admiral's uniform, had reshaped the atmosphere of Fort Raven in a single moment. And Sergeant Logan Reed, humbled but not broken, understood that the real battle had only just begun, the battle to rebuild himself as a leader worthy of the soldiers he commanded. As the assembly broke, and the recruits returned to their duties, whispers continued to circulate, now laced with reverence and awe. "It's really her. The Admiral? Did he know?" Logan walked back to his office, silent, tense, and thoughtful. For the first time, he questioned his methods, his pride, and the very foundation of his authority. The spray incident, the subtle guidance, the unwavering calm of Catherine Hayes, it had all led to this moment. And he knew, without doubt, that Fort Raven would never be the same again. In the quiet of his office, he sat, hands folded, head bowed not in shame, but in the realization that leadership was more than orders, more than discipline. Leadership, he now understood, demanded humility, vision, and courage, the very qualities that Catherine Hayes had displayed effortlessly. Outside, the sun glinted off the black SUVs, casting shadows across the training yard. Fort Raven was alive with whispers, glances, and quiet determination. A new era had begun, and at its center stood the woman who had silently endured, observed, and ultimately revealed the truth to everyone, including the man who had sprayed her with foam without knowing who she truly was. The revelation of Catherine Hayes' identity rippled through Fort Raven like a shockwave. The recruits whispered in every hallway, corner, and mess hall. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to react to the sudden shift in authority. For most, it was inspiring. For some, it was intimidating. And for Sergeant Logan Reed, it was the beginning of a reckoning that would test every part of his being. The following morning, Logan arrived at the training yard with a palpable tension radiating from him. He moved through the ranks with precision, but there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. Where once his steps had been confident, almost predatory, now they were measured, careful. Every command he gave was precise, yet he weighed his words carefully, mindful that missteps could be scrutinized under Catherine Hayes' sharp gaze. Catherine, now openly present in her Admiral's uniform, observed from the sidelines. Her expression was calm, but her mind catalogued every move Logan made, noting how he adapted or failed to adapt to her presence and the new dynamic. Her goal wasn't to humiliate him further, but to guide him toward genuine leadership. The day's exercises were grueling. Recruits faced complex tactical simulations designed to challenge not just their physical strength, but their critical thinking and teamwork. Logan attempted to lead as he always had, issuing commands with intensity. But he found that the fear-based tactics that had once commanded unquestioned obedience now had little effect. Recruits hesitated, uncertain whether to obey blindly or consider Catherine's subtle guidance. For the first time, Logan realized that respect could not be forced. His frustration mounted, but he recognized the truth in Catherine's earlier words. Fear is not respect. By mid-morning, Logan had been forced to adapt. He observed how recruits responded more positively when given clear instructions combined with encouragement rather than intimidation. Slowly, he began to incorporate this approach into his leadership style, correcting minor errors without shaming, offering praise for initiative, and even listening to suggestions. It was uncomfortable, unfamiliar territory, but he persisted. Catherine allowed him to navigate these adjustments, stepping back and letting him make mistakes when necessary. Her strategy was subtle but effective. Give him the opportunity to learn without direct interference, allowing him to internalize the lessons. As the day progressed, the consequences of her presence became increasingly apparent. Recruits were more confident, more engaged, and even those who had been timid under Logan's previous methods began to take initiative. Tasks that once required constant supervision were now executed smoothly. Logan noticed the change, though he resisted acknowledging it outright. During a lunch break, he sat alone in the mess hall, reflecting on the events of the past days. He had always believed that strength came from control and fear. Now, he saw how fragile that strength truly was. Catherine's influence had illuminated a truth he could no longer ignore. Leadership required more than discipline. It demanded understanding, empathy, and the ability to inspire. Meanwhile, Catherine continued her quiet observations. She watched Logan's struggle, noting both his resistance and his gradual growth. He was adapting, albeit reluctantly, but the potential for genuine transformation was there. She made mental notes for the days ahead, planning exercises that would further challenge his assumptions and reinforce the lessons he needed to internalize. The real test came during a field simulation. The recruits were divided into squads, tasked with defending a perimeter while facing simulated attacks. Logan led one squad, and Catherine oversaw the exercise from a central observation point. Early in the simulation, Logan's squad faced a scenario that tested both tactical skill and adaptability. Recruits encountered unexpected obstacles, blocked routes, simulated equipment failures, and sudden enemy maneuvers. Logan initially reverted to his old methods, issuing rapid-fire commands and expecting immediate obedience. Predictably, this approach faltered. Confusion and hesitation spread among the recruits, threatening the success of the exercise. Catherine stepped in, not directly, but subtly. She signaled adjustments from her observation point, and Logan, realizing the potential failure, adapted. He began to incorporate feedback, consider alternative strategies, and encourage his squad to think critically rather than blindly follow orders. The shift was minor but significant. The squad stabilized, executing the exercise with improved efficiency and cohesion. After the simulation, Catherine approached Logan. "You adapted under pressure," she noted, her tone measured but approving. "That is progress. Leadership is not static. It is tested by circumstance and response. You are beginning to understand this." Logan swallowed hard, the words sinking in. He nodded, acknowledging both her authority and the truth of her lesson. For the first time in his career, he felt that his pride could coexist with humility, a difficult but essential realization. The consequences of Catherine's intervention extended beyond Logan. The recruits were thriving in the new environment. Confidence replaced fear, initiative replaced hesitation, and teamwork flourished. The base itself seemed to breathe differently. The oppressive tension of past weeks lifted by a subtle shift in leadership dynamics. By evening, Logan gathered the recruits for debriefing. His voice was firm but calmer than usual, his instructions clear and respectful. He acknowledged their efforts, praised initiative, and provided constructive feedback. The recruits listened intently, inspired by the transformation in a leader they had once feared. Catherine observed quietly, allowing Logan to lead while monitoring his progress. She knew that true change required internalization, not coercion. He had begun to embrace the principles of leadership she had demonstrated: respect, guidance, and empowerment. The consequences of her presence, humbling, illuminating, transformative, were unfolding as planned. Later that night, Logan sat alone in his office, reflecting on the day. He had faced the most difficult test of his career, not a battlefield, not an enemy, but himself. Catherine Hayes had exposed his weaknesses, challenged his assumptions, and guided him toward a new understanding of leadership. The realization was humbling, even uncomfortable, but it was necessary. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Observation. Traditional methods of discipline, relying on fear, are insufficient. Leadership requires adaptability, empathy, and respect. Immediate steps: encourage initiative, provide guidance without intimidation, foster morale. Lessons learned through interaction with Admiral Hayes are invaluable. Begin implementation immediately." Outside, Fort Raven was quiet under a blanket of stars. The recruits slept, unaware of the internal transformations taking place within their leadership. Catherine, standing on the observation deck of the barracks, surveyed the base. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The consequences of her actions were already evident. The foundation for lasting change had been laid. For Logan, the night was a time of introspection and planning. He knew the journey ahead would be challenging, requiring continual self-reflection, adaptation, and courage. The spray incident that had seemed trivial days ago now felt like the pivotal moment that had ignited his transformation. Catherine, meanwhile, prepared for the next day. More exercises, more observations, and more subtle guidance awaited. The consequences of her undercover mission were unfolding as intended, shaping both individuals and the base itself. Fort Raven would emerge stronger, more resilient, and better prepared for the challenges ahead, all because one soldier had dared to spray the wrong recruit, unknowingly testing a future admiral, and setting in motion a chain of events that would redefine leadership within its walls. As the lights dimmed across the base, one truth remained clear: the consequences of Catherine Hayes' presence were profound, irreversible, and transformative. And Sergeant Logan Reed, humbled but determined, had taken the first steps toward becoming the leader he had never known he could be. The next morning at Fort Raven felt different. The air was crisp, but no longer heavy with tension. There was a subtle energy of anticipation, the kind that comes when people sense change, but don't yet know its full extent. Recruits lined up in the drill yard, eyes alert, waiting for instructions. Sergeant Logan Reed approached with a measured stride, shoulders squared, but shoulders noticeably less rigid than before. There was a new awareness in his eyes, a recognition of both responsibility and humility. Catherine Hayes, in her Admiral's uniform, observed from the perimeter, standing tall but silently, letting Logan take the lead. Her presence was both commanding and unobtrusive, a paradox that unsettled some and inspired others. She had made her reveal 2 days prior, and yet the base still buzzed with whispers. Recruits moved with purpose, eager to demonstrate the improvements in their performance and leadership. "Today," Logan began, his voice firm yet controlled, "we rebuild not just skills, but trust, initiative, and respect. Mistakes are expected, but learning from them is mandatory." The words felt different, even to him. Gone was the harshness that had dominated his commands for years. In its place was clarity and authority tempered by reason. He had learned that strength alone could not maintain order. Guidance, encouragement, and understanding were equally essential. Catherine stepped forward. "Sergeant Reed is beginning a process that all leaders should undergo," she said. "Redemption is not weakness. It is the recognition of past mistakes and the courage to correct them. Today, we practice leadership differently. I will observe, intervene minimally, and allow Sergeant Reed to demonstrate the evolution of his command." The recruits straightened instinctively. Whispers passed among them. Redemption? The Admiral herself is calling it that? The first exercise was a complex tactical simulation, defending the base against a simulated enemy incursion. Squads were tasked with securing multiple points, managing resources, and maintaining communication under high stress. Logan led one squad, giving clear instructions but allowing the soldiers' discretion in execution. He had learned to balance authority with flexibility, permitting initiative while maintaining oversight. Catherine watched silently, cataloging every movement, every decision, and every interaction. She had seen the potential in Logan and the recruits, and today would be the day it began to materialize fully. Midway through the exercise, Logan faced a critical moment. One recruit, Private Jensen, misinterpreted a command and risked compromising the squad's position. In the past, Logan would have yelled, reprimanded, and punished. Today, he did something different. "Jensen, assess the situation quickly and adapt," he instructed calmly. "Learn from this moment. Adjust your position to cover the north perimeter." Jensen's eyes widened in surprise, but he followed the command, correcting the error immediately. Other recruits observed, noting the change in their leader. Logan's approach encouraged problem-solving, initiative, and accountability without instilling fear. By the end of the simulation, Logan's squad had performed flawlessly, not because of intimidation, but because of mutual trust, clear guidance, and the freedom to act within parameters. Recruits were energized, motivated, and engaged. Catherine approached Logan during the debriefing. "You managed the unexpected without reverting to fear," she said. "You provided clear direction, offered support, and allowed initiative. That is leadership in its truest form." Logan nodded slowly. "It's harder than I expected," he admitted quietly. "Easier to demand obedience than earn it. But I understand now." Catherine allowed herself a faint smile. Understanding is the first step. Implementation comes next. The day continued with a series of exercises designed to test not only physical endurance, but also decision-making, ethical judgment, and leadership under pressure. Logan found himself continuously adjusting, learning from minor errors, and observing the effects of his commands on the recruits. Each success built his confidence. Each mistake offered a lesson. The recruits, for their part, responded with enthusiasm and growing respect. They were no longer simply following orders. They were thinking, acting, and cooperating. Even those who had struggled under Logan's previous methods began to thrive, inspired by the shift in leadership style. By evening, Catherine gathered all recruits and officers for a review. The air was charged with anticipation, the recruits eager to hear feedback from both leaders. "Fort Raven has begun a process of transformation," Catherine began. "Today, we have seen leadership evolve from control to collaboration, from fear to respect. Sergeant Reed has demonstrated the courage to learn, adapt, and redeem himself as a leader. This is not a one-time event. Leadership is a continual process, one that requires reflection, humility, and the willingness to grow. The recruits absorbed every word. Applause spread through the yard, genuine and enthusiastic. Logan, standing beside Catherine, felt a mixture of pride, relief, and awe. The path ahead was long, but today had marked the beginning of something far greater than he had ever imagined. That night, Logan returned to his office alone. The day's events replayed in his mind like a series of vivid lessons. He recognized the extent of his previous mistakes and felt the weight of the responsibility to not only correct them, but to sustain the changes he had begun to implement. Catherine joined him, quietly, standing at the edge of the office. "You've done well today," she said softly. The recruits respond to genuine guidance. Remember this feeling. Let it guide you. Logan looked up, meeting her eyes. "I never thought I'd see the day when fear wouldn't be enough," he admitted. "It isn't," she said simply. "And it never was. Leadership is influence, not intimidation. You've taken the first steps. The rest is up to you." Over the following days, Logan began implementing structural changes at Fort Raven. He revised training protocols, introduced mentorship programs, and emphasized collaboration. Catherine continued to observe, offering subtle corrections and guidance when necessary, but mostly allowing him to lead, make decisions, and learn from outcomes. The recruits flourished under the new system. Confidence replaced hesitation, initiative replaced fear, and the base itself seemed to hum with renewed energy. Even the most skeptical soldiers began to recognize the transformation in their once intimidating sergeant. One afternoon, during a routine drill, a recruit approached Logan with a tactical suggestion. In the past, such input would have been dismissed outright. Today, Logan listened, considered, and incorporated the idea. The maneuver succeeded brilliantly. The recruit beamed, feeling both respected and empowered. Catherine, observing from a distance, allowed herself a rare smile of satisfaction. The principles she had demonstrated, the tests she had orchestrated, and the lessons she had imparted were finally taking root. Leadership at Fort Raven had been rebuilt from the ground up. By the end of the week, Logan had transformed. He was no longer a figure of fear, but a leader of respect, empathy, and authority. The recruits trusted him, relied on him, and were inspired by his example. And for Catherine Hayes, the mission she had begun undercover had reached a pivotal milestone. Redemption, both for Logan and the base, was underway. Fort Raven, once a place of rigid hierarchy and fear, had become a model of modern military leadership. The echoes of change spread through every corridor, drill yard, and barracks. The foundation had been laid, but the work was far from over. Together, Logan and Catherine had begun to cultivate a new era, one defined not by fear, but by respect, collaboration, and unwavering commitment to excellence. As night fell, the base was quiet yet alive with promise. Logan, now seated at his desk, reviewed the week's progress and realized something profound. Leadership was no longer about control. It was about influence, growth, and the courage to embrace change. And Fort Raven, under the guidance of Catherine Hayes and the reformed Logan Reed, was poised to become stronger than ever before. The storm had passed, but the lessons would endure. Fort Raven would never be the same, and neither would Logan Reed. Redemption was not a single act. It was a process, a journey. And for the first time, he was ready to see it through to the end. The sun rose over Fort Raven in brilliant streaks of gold, casting long shadows over the yard. The crisp morning air carried a quiet energy, the kind of energy that comes after a storm is past and new growth begins. Recruits lined up in formation, moving with precision and confidence. The base had transformed, subtly but profoundly, in the weeks since Catherine Hayes' revelation and Logan Reed's redemption. The changes were visible everywhere. Drill exercises no longer bore the oppressive weight of fear. Recruits carried themselves with initiative and purpose, aware that their actions mattered, and that their leader valued both their judgment and their discipline. Sergeant Logan Reed, once a figure of intimidation, now walked the yard with a quiet authority, his posture straight but relaxed, his voice firm but measured. Catherine Hayes stood at the observation deck, the morning sun reflecting off her medals and insignia. She watched Logan interact with his recruits, noting how he had learned to balance authority with empathy. Her undercover mission had accomplished more than she had anticipated. Not only had she tested and reshaped Logan, but she had also initiated a ripple of cultural transformation throughout Fort Raven. The day began with a tactical simulation, one of the most challenging yet. Recruits were tasked with defending a perimeter while responding to multiple, rapidly evolving scenarios, simulated attacks, equipment failures, and communication disruptions. In the past, such chaos would have led to panic, mistakes, and punishment. Today, however, the base moved as a cohesive unit. Logan's squad coordinated flawlessly, each recruit making decisions confidently and effectively. Logan provided guidance where needed, but allowed his soldiers to act independently, stepping in only when necessary. He had embraced the principle Catherine had emphasized. Leadership was influence, not intimidation. Midway through the exercise, an unexpected complication arose. A simulated breach occurred in a sector Logan was overseeing. In the past, his immediate reaction would have been to issue rapid, harsh commands, barking orders in hopes of regaining control. But now he paused, assessed the situation, and calmly delegated tasks. He trusted his recruits to act, and they did. The exercise concluded successfully, with minimal errors and maximum coordination. The recruits cheered, but Logan didn't seek their approval. Instead, he quietly acknowledged their efforts, nodding to individuals who had excelled. This subtle recognition reinforced respect and morale, and it was clear to Catherine that Logan had internalized the lessons of humility, guidance, and empowerment. After the simulation, Catherine called a formal assembly. Recruits and officers gathered in the main yard, the energy palpable. Whispers of admiration passed among the recruits. They had witnessed the transformation of both their leader and the environment they trained in. Fort Raven has endured a period of extraordinary challenge, Catherine began, her voice carrying across the yard. We face not just tests of skill, but tests of leadership, trust, and resilience. Sergeant Reed has confronted his methods, embraced growth, and demonstrated that redemption is not a single act, it is a process. Logan stood beside her, head held high. He had been humbled, challenged, and transformed, and now he understood the weight of responsibility that came with leadership. "Recruits," he said, his voice steady, "today we move forward together. Discipline remains essential, but it is no longer built on fear alone. We are a team, and every action we take affects the whole. Lead with respect, act with integrity, and trust in your comrades. That is the path to true strength." The recruits listened intently, their admiration for both leaders evident in every posture and gaze. The transformation was complete. Fort Raven had become a place of trust, empowerment, and effective leadership, where mistakes were treated as opportunities for growth rather than reasons for punishment. Later that afternoon, Logan met with Catherine privately in her office. "I can't thank you enough," he said, his tone sincere. "You forced me to see myself and my methods for what they were. I thought I was strong, but I was blind. You've changed the base, the recruits, and me." Catherine regarded him calmly, her expression unreadable but firm. "Strength is not defined by control, Logan. It is defined by the ability to guide, influence, and inspire. You've learned that now. Remember it, and continue to apply it. Leadership is not a moment, it's a lifetime of decisions." He nodded, a sense of resolve settling over him. For the first time, He understood that his journey was ongoing, that the lessons of respect, empathy, and guidance would require vigilance, patience, and courage. As the days passed, the culture of Fort Raven solidified. The mentorship programs Logan had implemented flourished. Recruits taught each other, shared tactical insights, and provided constructive feedback. The once rigid hierarchy became a system of collaboration and mutual accountability. Officers reported improvements in efficiency, morale, and cohesion. The base was no longer just a training facility. It was a model of modern military leadership. Catherine Hayes' presence began to recede gradually, her role shifting from observer and mentor to supporter and guide. She left Logan in command of the base, confident that the changes she had seeded would endure. Her mission had been risky, unconventional, but ultimately successful. Fort Raven was stronger, its recruits more capable, and its leadership truly tested and transformed. One evening, as the sun set over the base, Logan stood on the observation deck where he had once watched Catherine silently, absorbing her methods and lessons. Now, he observed his recruits with pride, knowing that he had earned their respect not through fear, but through guidance, empowerment, and trust. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, tempered by the knowledge that leadership was a lifelong journey, not a destination. Recruits gathered around him, sharing stories of improvements, successes, and moments of bravery during the exercises. They laughed, strategized, and celebrated achievements together, a stark contrast to the tense, fear-driven environment of weeks before. Logan listened, responded, and guided them, his authority now inseparable from respect. The legacy of Catherine Hayes' intervention became evident not just in tactics and drills, but in the character of the soldiers themselves. They carried themselves differently, thought critically, and acted decisively. Her lessons had transcended her direct influence, instilling a culture that would continue long after she had left Fort Raven. Finally, Catherine returned one last time to the base. She walked the drill yard, observing quietly as Logan led a final exercise under her supervision. She smiled faintly, satisfied with the transformation she had witnessed. Fort Raven was no longer the same base. It had evolved, strengthened, and endured the challenges of leadership and change. She approached Logan, who turned to face her, respect and gratitude evident in his expression. "You've left the base in capable hands," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The lessons will endure because you've embraced them and because the recruits believe in them." Logan nodded. "I understand. I'll continue what you started. Thank you, Admiral Hayes, for everything." She gave a small, approving nod. "Remember, Logan, leadership is a living legacy. How you shape it determines the strength of those who follow." With that, Catherine Hayes departed Fort Raven, her mission complete. Logan Reed watched her leave, a mixture of admiration, respect, and determination in his gaze. The base remained alive with the energy of growth and transformation, a testament to her vision and his redemption. In the months that followed, Fort Raven continued to thrive. Recruits graduated with confidence. Officers implemented the new leadership strategies across other bases, and Logan Reed emerged as a respected, capable, and inspirational leader. The story of the spray incident, once a moment of humiliation, became a legendary tale of unintended consequences, resilience, and transformation. The legacy of Catherine Hayes endured not just in policies and procedures, but in the hearts and minds of every recruit and officer who had witnessed her methods, her discipline, and her wisdom. And Logan Reed, forever changed, carried forward the lessons of humility, empowerment, and leadership, ensuring that Fort Raven would remain a place where strength and respect coexisted, shaping soldiers who are not only capable but inspired. As the sun set over the training yard for the final time in Catherine's presence, the base stood strong, unified, and ready for the future. A new era of leadership had begun, and Fort Raven would never be the same again. The story of the soldier who sprayed the wrong recruit had turned into a legend, not for the mistake, but for the transformation it unleashed, the lessons it imparted, and the legacy it created. And at the heart of it all stood two leaders. One, a former sergeant who had learned to lead with respect. The other, an admiral who had shown the power of observation, guidance, and unwavering purpose. Together, they had rewritten the rules of leadership at Fort Raven, leaving an indelible mark on the lives of everyone within its walls.